Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at a table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me." She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for a burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her.
I remember every detail. There I was, floating through a candlelit room, jar in hand, his eyes following my every move. I could feel the scorn of the men, the ice in their complaint, and the strength in my Lord's voice saying, "Leave her alone." I love the smell of that perfume, the warmth of being close to him, the feel of my hair against his skin. And in my grief for what I knew was about to come, I silently mixed my tears with that perfume. Now I ask you, which was worth more? The men said I cost too much money. They had a point, perhaps. But how much is too much to honor the man who lived as he lived, spoke as he spoke, and loved as that man loved? How much is too much to thank the man for doing so much for all of us? I tell you, I would have spent double, happily, without remorse, and even then wondered if it was sufficient. And so, every year, on this Friday, I take a jar like this one, and I pour that ethereal perfume in my hair. Oh, how it comes back to me. And I feel close to him again. And if you also deem that a waste of money, then I say, your money be damned. To be in his presence is worth everything to me. Everything.
While he was still speaking, Judah, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judah said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, friend." Then the men stepped aside, seized Jesus, and arrested him.
I walked into that garden carrying a bag full of money and a soul full of guilt. The air, usually peaceful and cool on the hillside among the olive trees, cracked with tension. 24 hours earlier, I had been so sure, positive I was doing the right thing, convinced it was better for this one man to die than for all of Jerusalem to perish at the hands of the Romans. So I met the authorities, made the deal, collected the money, gathered the soldiers. But the second I stepped into that garden, something inside me snapped. I heard it. I knew it. If we are to be saved, Jesus needs to live. But it was too late. I could not back out now. I had become part of something bigger than myself. The wheels of history were turning, and I was caught up on the wrong side and powerless to do anything about it. He saw me in the dim light and stepped forward. In that moment, everything stopped. It was just the two of us, Jesus and me. Looking into my eyes, he saw the struggle, the agony I felt. He understood. "Friend," he said, "do what you came for." I stepped closer. His eyes were warm, accepting. His cheek felt cold against my lips. Suddenly, surprisingly, and briefly, I felt his arms around me. Or did I imagine that? The violence broke out before I could tell for sure. I knew his followers would never forget the kiss. But I wonder if perhaps, somewhere, there is a greater grace. Perhaps somehow, even I can be forgiven.
Early in the morning, all the chief priests and elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him."
I have a lot of dreams. Let's be clear about that right now. I always have, and suppose I always will. I think God often speaks to us in strange ways, like dreams. My husband, he's had to listen to more of my dreams than you can count. He does it to humor me, I know, but it's nice anyways. He doesn't put much stock in my little wisps of smoke, as he calls them. He's a soldier, a man of the sword, of strength, authority, and judgment. My wisps of air, he thinks they're cute. If he thinks about them at all. This one dream I had night after night, but in a different forms. It left me upset, anxious. I dreamed of a goodness, a wonder, a light in the world. It never took shape, but came as a presence, an aura, a hovering. I could never be sure. But the evil is always clear. Dark and thundering, it moves against the goodness. Violently and cruelly, it rages against the good, crushes it, swallowing it in darkness, eliminating it. I wake up breathless and scared. I could never quite get it. It seemed too important to ignore, but too mysterious to explain. It was a cloud over my life, and I tried to push it away, ignore it, until that day. The dream pulsed again through my restless sleep. Pontius left early that morning to judge a man I'd heard about, my servant girl, and I talked about him often. She knew all about him, his healing, his teaching, his acceptance of all. "He's just so good," she exclaimed that morning. With those words, my eyes were opened. Suddenly, I understood. Frantic, I tried to get word to Pontius, but it was too late. It was too late. I often wonder what would have happened if I had listened sooner.
But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "Is it your responsibility?" All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children."
Killing is what I do. It's my job. I've killed the guilty. I've killed the innocent. I don't know really if there's a difference between the two. There is. I've never cared. I figure we're all guilty enough to deserve judgment. So it struck me that day to be confronted with innocence. I mean, real innocence. Innocence as I couldn't even imagine. I'd never seen anything like it. But there it was. There he was. And there they were, scheming men who, for whatever reason, wanted him dead, and had whipped the crowd into a frenzy to pressure me. I did the best I could. At least I thought I did at the time. I washed my hands of the whole thing. Actually, I took the path of illusionary innocence. I say illusionary because this experience taught me that there would be no chance of innocence for me on that day. A man can wash his hands 1,000 times. Wash until the skin comes off. It doesn't change the facts. It has been said that I was on trial that day, not this renegade healer, this Christ. I think that's probably correct. Though I claim to be innocent, history knows the truth. When I left office, I took this basin with me. Every morning, I fill it again with clean, clear water, seeking relief to no avail. I fear that it will take a far greater flood to wash the guilt away from these hands.
Then he released Barabbas to them. But he had Jesus flogged. and handed him over to be crucified.
We Romans educate our prisoners with whips. Whipping is often criticized for cruelty, but to us, it's a beautiful thing. Like a song sung in 4-part harmony, each one must do his part. First, there's a caller. That's me. Calling out the strokes by number rhythmically, steady, and strong. 1, 2, 3. Then the flag riffer, 2 of them. One on the right, one on the left of the prisoner's bare back. They take turns skillfully lashing out the man's back, so it opens evenly to the bone. 4, 5, 6. The final line, the melody, so to speak, sings in the screams and curses of the prisoner. It's a sweaty, bloody job, but one that yields beauty. A horrid beauty every time. Except for once. I remember it well. The prisoner was slated to die on the tree. Some miracle worker, condemned for vague offenses. Our job was to educate him well. But to leave him strong enough to carry his cross to the hill outside the city. Things did not go well. I called the numbers clear and loud. The men fiercely slashed their whips across his back, opening gash after gash. But the man never made a sound. Not a scream, not a curse, not a whimper. My frustration, I yelled the numbers louder and louder. 25, 26, 27. My men slashed until their arms grew weary. Yet not one sound was heard. The melody was missing. In our frustration, we continued well past the point of strength. Too late, I called. An end to the fruitless torture. Too late. I recognized he'd never make it to Calvary unaided. For that my team and I were severely punished by Pilate. And deservedly so, I will admit. But the strangest moment happened as we sent him out. I called the guards to take him away. Exhausted and covered in his blood, my men and I rested, waiting for our next prisoner to be brought in. Then, as the miracle worker stumbled past us, hardly able to stand, he paused and looked each one of us in the eyes. Gathering all the strength he had left, he gasped the words I will never forget. You, he said, you are forgiven.
They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out loud, voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing near heard this, they said, listen, he's calling Elijah. Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down, he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood in front of Jesus saw how he was died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God."
My name is Longinus, a soldier, a centurion in Rome's 10th Army. I oversee death every day, death by crucifixion. You look at me and you see an executioner. I see myself as a peacekeeper. Trust me, keeping the Roman peace requires endless crucifixions. For that reason, every year at the festival of Passover, my men and I travel to Jerusalem. Pontius Pilate and his little band of toy soldiers could never handle the number of crucifixions required to keep the peace there during Passover. So we are here to help. That Friday, I was there doing my duty when they half-dragged a man named Jesus up the hill. Pilate had sent a sign with him, as he often did, to indicate what the crime involved was. The sign said, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." I paused in my work because it didn't say that he claimed to be the King of the Jews, but it said that he was the king. Pilate was not a man who would make a mistake like this, so I wondered what he was up to. Something significant must have happened between Jesus and Pilate at the trial. Well, orders are orders, sign or no sign, I proceeded with the crucifixion. I remember joking with my men as they drove the nails home. He's not the first king we've crucified, and he likely won't be the last. But my joking quickly stopped. As we raised the cross high and the dying began, strange things began to happen. In addition to Pilate's puzzling sign, the man on the cross, Jesus, rather than the usual screaming and cursing, he used his last gasping breaths and words to speak of God, of caring, of paradise, and of forgiveness. Then the bright midday sunlight turned into a gloomy darkness. And when Jesus cried out loudly and relinquished his life, the earth itself began to shake. My heart stood still, and in that moment I understood. I knew why Pilate had written the sign. I saw a divine light shining in the horrible darkness. I heard the voice of God speaking to me in those shaking stones, and I could not help but echo what I heard. I said it then, and I believe it to this day. Surely this man was the Son of God.
On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. From the very start, I was looked upon as an object of fear and hate. I could make the hearts of men tremble. As they saw me, they saw their fate. The cruelest way that man could devise to punish and take life away. My purpose was clear, my job direct, to make those found guilty pay. On one day like no other, when my work was before me, I was strapped on the back of a man. His pain was so great and his strength nearly gone that he fell as he carried me along. When finally we arrived at that place I'd been often, they nailed him secure to my frame, and over his head they hung up a sign, "The King of the Jews," it read. Then they lifted us up and stood us in place, and the dance of death started on. He struggled for breath, yet he cried not in pain, but I knew that his suffering was strong. instead of the usual cries for mercy and the cursing of others I'd heard. This man cried, "Forgive them, they don't understand." I thought it the strangest of words. Then slowly, so slowly, his lifeblood gave way to the stillness of death I knew well. There he hung, suspended by me, not in heaven, but not quite in hell. The sky then turned black in the middle of the day. Without reason, the sun did not shine. And finally they took him to where, I don't know. My job then complete, I came down. Not really sure I quite understand all that happened on that special day. But the change that has come in the way I'm now seen is so real that I just have to say that now instead of the hate and the fear that I was a symbol of, I'm held in reverence and adorned in gold as a symbol of God's great love. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown.
As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb.
We saw where they laid his body, the other Mary and I. Through our tears, we saw the place. Joseph and Nicodemus did the best they could in the time they had before the sunset and the Sabbath began. But we could see it wasn't enough, that he deserved more. We saw the cold stone. We watched as they took one last look inside and rolled it across the doorway. We clutched each other tightly in the twilight as they pushed it into place. I can still hear the men as they strained against the weight, the deep crunch of the rolling stone along its track, the hollow thump as it settled in its place. Darkness was falling. The men hurried away to their duties. Despite the expectations of our families, we stayed until well after dark. We couldn't seem to get ourselves to go. We stood and wept, too stunned to leave. Finally, when the black of night had stolen, we embraced again and vowed to meet at first dawn on Sunday to properly care for his broken body. It was the least we could do. Exhausted and still sobbing, we turned from each other and stepped away into the darkness.